Hi, Beach Buddies. I am in our classroom today, as you can probably see. And I'm going to read you 2 chapters today because I didn't get to read yesterday. So remember, we left off with Mario getting Chester some leaves from Chinatown to eat since he didn't like his food. So chapter 10 is called The Dinner Party. Late one night, Chester Cricket was very busy inside the newsstand. As soon as the Bellinis went home, he hopped out of the matchbox and began to clean up. First, he pushed in the box so its sides were even and then slid it over beside the alarm clock. Next, he pulled a piece of Kleenex out of the Kleenex box and dragged it back and forth across the shelf. When the shelf was dusted, he picked up the tissue in his 2 front legs and polished the cricket cage so its bars shone. He wiped off the glass in the front of the alarm clock and the radio too, until he could see his own reflection. The dial of the clock was luminous and it shed a very soft green light. Chester wanted everything to be perfect on this particular evening. There was going to be a party. It was exactly 2 months since Chester had arrived in New York, and the 3 animals wanted to celebrate the anniversary. Nothing too formal, you understand, just a little dinner for everyone. Tucker Mouse had volunteered to let them use the drain pipe, but Chester didn't want to eat amid all the waste paper and rubbish that his friends collected. So after many conferences, they resolved on the newsstand. It was sheltered and quite big enough, and the radio could provide nice background music. Tucker Mouse jumped up beside Chester. "How is the food coming, Tucker?" asked the cricket. Tucker had been put in charge of refreshments. "Hick, hick, hick," laughed Tucker, rubbing his front legs. "Wait till I tell you." He lifted up 1 foot. "I have 2 chunks of liverwurst, 1 slice of ham, 3 pieces of bacon from a bacon, lettuce, and tomato sandwich, some lettuce and tomato from said sandwich, whole wheat rye and white crust, a big gob coleslaw, 2 squares from a Hershey chocolate bar, and the end of an O. Henry candy bar with nuts," he said. "And now comes the climax." Tucker paused. "Iced soft drinks." "How did you get the ice?" asked Chester. "Wait, I'll tell you," said Tucker. "All day I've been hiding by the lunch counter. When the soda jerks made a Coke, I grabbed the ice they spilled, which I then took to the drain pipe. There," he went on with especial pride, "it happens that I have a heat-proof insulated bag saved up just for such an occasion. So I put in the ice, shut up the opening, and we have ice. Nice, huh?" He sat back on his haunches and grinned at Chester. "Very nice," said Chester. "Where have you got the drinks?" "In paper cups," said Tucker, "and no mixing of drinks either. For each kind of soft drink, another cup." "That's wonderful," said the cricket with admiration. "Oh, it's nothing really," said Tucker, waving a foot. "I mean, it's something, but not too much." He looked around at the shelf and clock and everything. "You are to be congratulated on the cleanliness. Of course, it isn't as important as food getting, but to be clean is very nice, too." While they were talking, Harry Cat came in through the opening at the side of the newsstand. Chester hopped down like a good host to greet his new guest. "How was the concert?" he asked. Harry had been down to Washington Square to hear an open-air concert of chamber music. How you could play chamber music outdoors, Chester didn't understand, but it was New York, and anything could happen. "Very good," answered Harry, "but I don't think the violinist played nearly as well as you do." It made Chester very happy to hear that, but he had to turn away so Harry wouldn't see him blush. "Harry, help me with the food," said Tucker. He jumped down to the floor and scurried over to the drain pipe. The mouse and the cat put all the different courses over to one side with the soft drinks, so everyone could just go up and help himself. It was buffet style. Tucker and Chester sat on the shelf, and Harry, who was taller, sat on the stool, but his head was on a level with theirs. Tucker Mouse took great pride in cooling the soft drinks. There were 4 cups, 1 with Coca-Cola, 1 with Pepsi, 1 with root beer, and the last with orange pop. Tucker put a big piece of ice in each and made show of stirring them up with a straw he had found that afternoon. "Ah," he said, "where but in New York could a mouse have ice in his Coca-Cola?" "We should have music," said Harry. He reached over and flicked on the radio. First, they got a news report, but that wouldn't do for a party. Harry twisted the dial and went through a quiz show, an amateur hour, and a play about the Deep South before he got what he wanted. Music is very nice for a party because it gives you time to eat your fill without having to make conversation. Harry Cat was working on his second piece of O. Henry candy bar when he suddenly stopped munching and listened to the tune the radio was playing. His head began to sway from side to side. "That's my favorite song," he said, beginning to hum along with it. "Sing it, Harry," said Chester Cricket. "You don't know what you're letting yourself in for," blurted out Tucker Mouse through a mouthful of bacon, lettuce, and tomato sandwich. But Harry was in a party mood, so he cleared his throat and he began. "When I'm calling you," he sang. Harry had a delightful yowl that went on very well with the lyrics of the song. "You see what I told you?" groaned Tucker. Harry went right on, though. "How will you answer true?" "Maybe we should turn back to the amateur hour," said Tucker Mouse, helping himself to the Hershey bar. "I think Harry sings beautifully," said Chester. "You sing now, Chester," said Harry Cat. Secretly, the cricket was very anxious to perform for them, but he had to have some encouragement first. He limbered his wings and said, "It's not really singing, you know." "Singing, playing, who cares, as long as it doesn't sound like Harry," said Tucker Mouse. He slurped up the last of the orange soda, and they all fell silent. It was well along in August by now, and just the time of the year that crickets all over the world like most. Chester hadn't done nearly as much chirping as usual this summer because he was living in New York. But tonight he played to his heart's content. He thought of his meadow and the stump and the brook and the old willow tree. The song swelled up from his wings and filled the newsstand. When it was over, Tucker and Harry applauded and congratulated Chester. "Now play us something we know," suggested Harry Cat. "Well, I don't know if I can," said Chester. "All of my songs are my own compositions." "Listen to the radio and play what it does," said Harry, and he turned up the music. Here's a picture of the cat singing, or howling, it looks more like, doesn't it? Chester cocked his head to one side. The radio was playing the Blue Danube Waltz. When he had heard enough to memorize the melody, Chester joined in, and he played it perfectly. The cricket was such a natural musician that he had not only chirped the tune, in a few minutes he was making up variations and spinning them out without ever losing the rhythm of the waltz. He found that by tilting his wings he could make the notes go higher or lower, just like he wanted. Chester got an ovation from his friends. Harry Cat, who had crept into the Metropolitan Opera House a few times and knew how people acted there, shouted, "Bravo, Chester, bravo!" Of course, after such a sample of his talent for imitating songs, his friends insisted that he keep on, and Chester was happy to oblige. There's nothing like a good audience to encourage a performer. The next selection from the radio was a group of Italian folk songs. Chester picked out the different melodies and chirped them along with the orchestra. After the folk songs came a group of operatic arias. It was easier for Chester to play the ones written for tenors than the ones for sopranos, contraltos, or basses, but he did them all beautifully. Each time he stopped after singing a new piece, the animals shouted, "More, more, more!" So Chester went right on. Now came a South American rumba. The rhythm was very tricky, and it took the cricket a few minutes to catch on to it, but once he had it, he never lost the beat. Chirping away, he sounded like a pair of lively castanets. "Imagine," exclaimed Tucker Mouse, "he plays pop as well as classical." Tucker was feeling very lively himself because of all the soda water he had swallowed. The South American tempo began to excite him. He jumped up and started to dance around the shelf. Harry Cat burst out laughing, but that didn't bother Tucker. He was a carefree soul. "Chester can play, I can dance," he panted. "We should go into the vaudeville." "If you danced as well as you played, you could," said Harry. "So I'm just learning," said Tucker, and threw himself into a wild twirl next to Papa Bellini's pipe. He couldn't see where he was going, and he toppled over into the box of kitchen matches. The box flipped over. A shower of matches fell around the shelf and onto the cement floor. There were several yellow bursts and the sharp scratches that a match makes when it's lit. Most of them fell far enough away from the wooden walls so they could burn themselves out without danger. But one match, unluckily, struck right next to a pile of that morning's newspapers, and the spurt of flames it sent up lit the frayed edge of paper and quickly spread over the whole bundle. "Watch out!" shouted Chester. Harry Cat leaped up to the shelf just in time to keep his tail from being burned. The Cricket was the first to realize what had happened and was likely to happen if they didn't put the fire out. "Get the Coca-Cola," he said. "Pour it over." "I drank it all," shouted Tucker. "You would," said Chester. "Is there any ice?" Harry and Tucker dumped what was left in the insulated bag down on the flames, but it wasn't enough. The fire sputtered, died down, and then flared up again larger than ever. Maybe we can smother it," said Harry. There was a pile of newspapers on the very edge of the shelf, just above the fire. Harry strained and pushed and succeeded in toppling them over. They all peered over the edge to see if the fire was out. "Oh, fine," said Tucker. "She's still burning and you blocked the hole to get out." They were trapped. Harry and Tucker jumped down and started pulling away the magazines furiously, but the fire crept closer and they had to back away. "What a way to go," said Tucker. "I should have stayed on 10th Avenue. For a moment Chester got panicky, but he forced his thoughts back into order and took stock of the situation, and an idea struck him. In one leap he jumped onto the alarm clock, landing right on the button that set off the alarm. The old clock began ringing so wildly it shook itself around the shelf in a mad dance. Chester hopped back to his friends. "Any alarm is a fire," he said. So they waited, crouched against the wall. Here's a picture. It's not good, is it? What do you think they're going to do to get this fire out? On the opposite side of the stand, the flames were lapping against the wood. Already the paint on it had begun to blister. Chester could hear voices outside the newsstand. Even at this hour, there were always a few people in the station. Somebody said, "What's that?" "I smell smoke," said another. Chester recognized the voice. It was Paul, the conductor of the shuttle. There was a sound of footsteps running away, then running back again, and a hammering began. The newsstand shook all over. "Somebody get the other side," said Paul. The cover was wrenched off and clouds of smoke billowed up. The people standing around were astonished to see, through the fumes and the glare of a fire, a cat, a mouse, and a cricket running and jumping to safety. We'll go ahead and read chapter 11, called The Jinx. From the drain pipe, the animals watched Paul put out the fire. He dragged what papers he could out of the newsstand and got a bucket of water to douse the rest. And he watered down the walls to make sure they wouldn't flare up later. When the danger was over, he called up Papa Bellini on the telephone. "What a mess," said Tucker Mouse, looking at the soggy, smoldering piles of papers and magazines. No one knew what to say. "What are you going to do, Chester?" said Harry Cat finally. "I'm going back there," said Chester. "If the Bellinis find me gone, they'll think I set the fire and ran." "What makes you think they won't think you set the fire and stayed?" said Tucker. "I'll have to take that chance," said Chester. Before the cat or the mouse could say anything to stop him, he hopped over to the newsstand. Paul had told the engineer that he would miss a few trips on the shuttle, and he was waiting for the Bellinis. He didn't want anyone monkeying with the cash register while the cover was off. The conductor thought that the cups and bags from the animals' party had been left by Mario or Papa. While he was taking them over to the trash barrel, Chester jumped up on the shelf. Nothing there had been burned, but there was a smoky smell to everything. The cricket took a downhearted leap into the cage and settled himself for whatever might come. It didn't take the Bellinis long to arrive. They had taken a taxi, and when the Bellinis took a taxi, you could be sure it was an emergency. Chester could hear them hurrying down the steps from the street. Papa was trying to soothe Mama, who was wheezing heavily from asthma and excitement. When she saw the heaps of Scorp magazines and newspapers, she began to moan and shake her head. Papa eased her down into the stool, but it was still covered with water, and she stood up again with a wet spot on her skirt. Ruined. We are ruined, she sobbed. Everything's burned. Papa comforted her as best as he could by saying that it was only a few stacks of the Ladies' Home Journal that had been lost. But Mama wouldn't believe that anything less than complete destruction had come to them all. Mario, who brought up the rear of the sad parade, thought first for the safety of his cricket. He saw that Chester was in his cage, though, and decided that it would be best to help to keep quiet until Mama's outburst of grief had subsided. Paul told them what had happened, how he smelled smoke and heard the alarm clock ringing. Then he came to the part of the animals who had escaped from the burning newsstand. So, said Mama Bellini, all her despair changing into anger, animals in the newsstand again? Didn't I tell you? She lifted her forefinger at Mario. Didn't I say the cricketer would ask in his pals? He probably set the fire. He's a firebug. Mario didn't have a chance to speak. He would open his mouth to defend Chester, but before he could say a thing, the words were drowned in Mama's flood of reproaches. She had found someone on whom she could blame her unhappiness, and there was no stopping her. The fact remains, said Mama. Oh, hang on, I skipped a line. When a pause came, Mario said meekly, my cricket would never do anything like burn up our newsstand. The fact remains, said Mama. We had a fire. But crickets are good luck, Mario began. Good luck, said Mama indignantly. He eats money. He commits arson. He's a jinx, that's what. He's good luck going backwards, and he's got to go. She folded her arms across her chest. It was an attitude that Mario knew meant the absolute end of everything. I could keep him somewhere else, the boy offered. No, said Mama, shaking her head as firmly as a door being closed. He's a jinx. He goes. Papa put his finger to his lips as a signal that Mario shouldn't say anything more, and the two of them began to clean up. They carted away all the hopelessly burned magazines and tried to salvage some that had only been scorched. Mario mopped the floor of the newsstand while Mama spread out papers to dry. By the time they were finished, it was almost the hour for the first wave of commuters. Chester was lying on the floor of the cricket cage. He felt guilty. Oh, our lights just went out in here, but I guess that's okay. He felt guilty. Hang on. Because even if it hadn't set in a way, the fire was his fault. If he hadn't invited everyone into the newsstand, it wouldn't have happened. And it was his playing of the Roomba that made Tucker want to dance, and so tip over the matches. And he did eat the $2 bill. He began to believe that he really was a jinx. During the early morning rush hour, Mario was especially eager in his shouts of, paper, mister, and time or life, mister. Papa was more active than usual, too, but Mama sat glumly on the stool with a gray, determined look on her face. Despite the fact that the selling that morning went very well, she wouldn't change her mind. After the rush was over, Papa went out to buy a new lock. Chester heard a soft scratching from behind the Kleenex box. A familiar face peeked out. What's going on? Whispered Tucker Mouse. Are you crazy? Said Chester under his breath. All they need is to catch you here. I had to find out how you are doing, said Tucker. They're going to throw me out, sighed Chester. Oh, Tucker moaned. And it was me that did it. Supposing I give you the rest of my life's savings, maybe we could buy them off. Chester leaned his black little head up against the bars of the cricket cage. Not this time, he said. Mama's got her mind made up. I don't blame her either. I wish I'd never come to New York. Oh, Chester, wailed Tucker Mouse, don't say that. You'll make me feel like a rat, and I'm only a mouse. It's not your fault, Tucker, said Chester, but I've been nothing but bad luck to them since I came. Without knowing what he was doing, the cricket began to chirp to ease his feelings. He found that it helped somehow if you sang your sadness. He wasn't paying much attention, and just by accident he played the first few notes of an Italian folk song that he had heard the night before. It was so melancholy and yet so sweet that it fit his mood exactly. Mama Bellini was untying a bundle of Herald Tribunes when she heard the chirping. At first she didn't know what it was. And I don't know these words. They're like Italian. Che cuesta? she said in Italian, which means, "What's that?" Chester stopped playing. Mama said it again. "Who is singing?" Mario looked at his mother. Usually when she spoke in Italian, it meant that she was in a good mood, but that couldn't be true today. Now Tucker Mouse was a very good judge of character, both animals and humans. He thought he heard a kind of softness in Mama Bellini's voice. "Play some more," he whispered to Chester. "She hates me," said Chester. It'll only make her more angry." "Do as I tell you," commanded the mouse urgently. So Chester started to chirp again. He was in such disgrace anyway. What difference could it make? The piece he was playing was called "Come Back to Sorrento," and by the greatest good luck, it happened to be Mama Bellini's favorite song. Back in Naples, Italy, when Papa was courting her before they came to America, he used to come beneath her window on a moonlit night and sing this ballad to the plunking of his old guitar. As the cricket chirped, the whole scene came back to Mama. The still, warm night, the moon shining down on the velvety bay of Naples, and Papa singing to her. Tears welled up in her eyes at the thought as she thought of the bygone times, and very softly she began to murmur the words to the song. Chester Cricket had never played with so much skill before. When he heard Mama singing, he slowed his tempo so she could keep up without straining. When she was loud, he was too, and then softer when she got choked up with emotion and her voice dwindled. But always his chirping carried her along, keeping her on the right beat and the right tune. He was the perfect accompanist. Mario was dumbfounded. He stared astonished at the cricket cage and then at his mother. It was just as marvelous for his mother to be singing as it was for a cricket to chirp familiar songs. Sometimes when she was very happy, Mama Bellini whistled, and once or twice Mario had heard her hum. But now here she was crying and warbling like an Italian nightingale. Chester finished up. "Come back to Sorrento." Keep it up, squeaked Tucker Mouse. "She's a sucker for sad songs." There's a quick picture of her singing. What do you think's going to happen? She might let Chester stay, you think? Before Mama's mood had a chance to wear off, Chester began chirping the selections from opera that he had played during the party. Mama didn't know the words to the operas, but she hummed some of the tunes along with him. Mario was as still as stone. Papa Bellini came back from the locksmith. Coming down the stairs, he was surprised not to hear his wife and Mario calling out newspapers. But when he got near the newsstand, he was even more surprised to hear the strains of the Grand March from Ada coming from the cricket cage. "He chirps opera," exclaimed Papa. His eyes looked as big and startled as two hard-boiled eggs. "Shh," said Mama with a wave of her hand. Chester's memory for music was perfect. He had to hear a piece only once to remember it forever. When he had finished all the operatic numbers, he stopped. "Should I go on with the pop tunes?" he whispered to Tucker Mouse, who was still hidden behind the Kleenex box. "Wait a while," said Tucker. "See what happens." Mama Bellini had a dreamy look in her eyes. She put her arm around her son and said, "Mario, no cricketer who sings Torna Sorrento so beautifully could possibly start a fire. He can stay a while longer." Mario threw his arms around his mother's neck. You hear, squealed Tucker Mouse. "You can stay. Oh boy, oh boy, oh boy. And this is only the beginning. I'll be your manager, okay?" "Okay," said Chester. And so began the most remarkable week in Chester Cricket's, or any cricket's, life. That is the end of chapter 11. We'll read chapter 12 tomorrow, called Mr. Smedley. We'll see what happens. All right, hope you guys are having a good day.